Get some!
All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Fun day ahead, let's hope. We've got news for you.
We do. We begin with a big update in regard to the Biden campaign and an attack ad he's put out into the world. Let's watch.
He says he stands with auto workers, but as president, Donald Trump passed tax breaks for his rich friends while automakers shuttered their plants and Michigan lost manufacturing jobs. Joe Biden said he'd stand up for workers, and he's delivering, passing laws that are increasing wages and creating good-paying jobs. Manufacturing is coming back to Michigan because Joe Biden doesn't just talk, he delivers.
The Biden campaign threw some serious jabs at their political opponent, Donald Trump, and that is their latest political ad. Now, the unflattering golfing shots of the former president and details about manufacturing plants closing during his tenure, I believe, really matter and could help Biden in this campaign. And look, this comes as Trump is set to skip the Republican primary debates and address non-union workers in Michigan today. Now, this ad will air nationally, including in Michigan, of course. And according to the Biden-Harris campaign, Delivers, which is the title of this new ad, will run on national cable channels and on TV and digital in Michigan. This ad is part of Team Biden-Harris's 16-week, $25 million advertising campaign that is reaching key voters in battleground states and includes the largest and earliest investment in Hispanic and African-American media for a re-election campaign in history. And according to Kevin Munoz, who is a campaign spokesperson for the Biden-Harris campaign, he says more empty promises in Michigan or anywhere else can't erase Donald Trump's egregious failures and broken promises to America's workers. He can't hide his anti-labor, anti-jobs record from the countless American workers he's let down. This election will be a choice between President Biden's real advocacy for working class Americans or working Americans and a rerun of billionaire Donald Trump's broken promises to the middle class. And to be clear, while we obviously have our critiques and criticisms in regard to the job that President Joe Biden has done so far, I would say that the highlight of his presidency so far is his National Labor Relations Board. And he has been very pro-labor relative to other presidents, including Democratic administrations. And so he does deserve credit in that arena. And I'll explain more of that in just a moment. But Cenk, what do you think?
I think it's a good start and it's a good sign because they're focusing on the right things. So, and I don't mean Donald Trump's waistline, although that's a fun little addition. Mainly that he's full of crap on jobs and wages, etc. Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, did a fantastic job with this on CNN the other night. But he's not a part of the Democratic Party. He also takes shots at Biden, and he's fair. And that's part of why we like him. But if you're being fair, yes, Biden's record is definitely better than Donald Trump's record. Donald Trump doesn't even believe in minimum wage. He says your wages should be potentially even lower than $7.25 an hour. He's never supported the workers, ever. A lot of BS talk spewing out of his mouth, but never backs it up. But he did deliver for those corporations big time. And recently he was just, commenting about how much, the poor corporations can't catch a break. So that's who he is. He's a fake populist, and that this ad is beginning to expose that is a good sign.
Now, I agree. I think that it makes a lot of sense to touch on the issues that the majority of Americans, including even those on the right wing, care deeply about. And and the unequal society we live in, the economic system that has only increased and exacerbated inequality is something that Americans are frustrated about, which is why the faux populist messaging coming from Donald Trump in 2016 unfortunately did resonate, even though we all know talk is cheap and he didn't put any action behind those words. Now, with that said though, what I find really fascinating about the response or reaction to Biden's latest campaign ad is how establishment Democrats have reacted to it. They feel that Biden should have focused his attacks on Donald Trump's 91 indictments instead of the workers' issues. Many would like to see Biden go after Trump on those indictments. In fact, even Joe Scarborough weighed in on this. Now, to be fair, this is on September 8th. So this wasn't after he saw the Biden attack ad, but in this Morning Joe segment, they were discussing how Biden needs to attack Trump. And when you watch this video, you'll get a sense on what they want the attacks to look like. Let's watch.
The judge said that by any definition, used by the US Army, used by the American Medical Association, used by any other organization, Donald Trump was a rapist. I think people might want to hear that, and they may want to hear that he stole nuclear secrets, and they may want to hear from Joe Biden that he's been charged with stealing secret war plans. I mean, these are very relevant to who the next president of the United States should and should not be.
So we should address two things. Number one, the efficacy of the type of attack ads that people like Joe Scarborough are asking for. But also, I think it's worth having a discussion about why it is that the Democratic establishment wants Biden to kind of shy away from the workers-related attack ads against Biden and instead focus on the 91 indictments, which, to be quite frank, I don't think will be as effective. But I could be wrong. What do you think, Cenk?
So you know me, I'd hit him with everything I got, and so people always talking about should we do this or that? Why don't you do one thing in ads and have your surrogates do another, and have Biden do a third? So look, it's a good sign that has a pulse because this is the first ad he's run. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has run countless ads against Ron DeSantis and has already pummeled him and destroyed him. So the idea that you keep your powder dry is, I've got a word for it, it's dumb. It is inexcusable, inarguable. There is no evidence that keeping your powder dry is somehow going to magically help you. No, making your case helps you. If you don't make your case, you're a stupid person. So here they have at least begun. They've taken the first step. I'm trying to be positive. It's a good ad. It's a good sign, etc. Now, having said that, if you have a limited amount of money, and you do for ads, they have a giant amount of money, but it's still limited. You have to know how to prioritize what you're going to emphasize. I would definitely emphasize economic issues. I would emphasize anything that affects the average American. And because guys, here's what you don't need too many ads on. Everybody already knows Donald Trump's a terrible person. Terrible, right? So the Democrats know that he's terrible. Most of the independents know that he's terrible. And a lot of MAGA that likes him because he's terrible. You're not gonna change any minds over that, right? So, I mean, remember in the Republican town hall that CNN conducted, when they talked about how he raped that poor woman, the crowd gave him an ovation. So I'm not a Republican, that's on them. And you could say, oh, maybe it's not a representative sample, but they were pretty loud. So that's not gonna work. Okay, and then we're not trying to flip Republicans anyway, we're trying to flip independents, right? So why is going after the average, his record on the average man versus your record better and more effective? Because it's about the voter. The voter doesn't care about your drama and your soap opera. The voter cares about their own lives. And it's remarkable that politicians, after being in politics for 50, 100, 200 years, still don't know that. And they're still, and by the way, including media pundits, and they're still having a debate over that. There is no debate over that. Again, you don't know much about politics if you don't know that you're supposed to appeal to your voters and not get obsessed with your own self. But again here, guys, I wanna be clear. Out of the gate, the first ad is good. It's good. I don't want you to think it's criticism of the ad. The ad is very good. In that case, I'm criticizing mainstream media saying don't focus on economic issues and focus on his character.
Right, and so look, I think the biggest flaw in that thinking is just being so tethered to conventional wisdom that the establishment has difficulty understanding how things have changed and what actually appeals to ordinary voters. So look, it is true that when it comes to campaigning on economic policy, if you get too wonky and you get too complicated in what you're proposing, yeah, eyes will glaze over and some of the culture war related topics will grab way more attention. But in this particular case, I think that the ad is so good in making an economic issue clear and easy to understand, right? Manufacturing jobs went away under Donald Trump's watch. There's obvious inequality. Biden is supportive of like the striking workers, and he did address the striking workers in Michigan, which we'll talk about a little later in the show. And so simplifying that economic message, I think, is effective. Trump is a good example of how simplifying that economic message and pretending to care about ordinary people and their livelihoods, like it was effective in 2016. I think Biden leaning into that and actually having the receipts to prove that he's better on those issues than Trump is a better strategy than avoiding attacking Trump at all or just focusing on how Trump is a bad guy.
Look, I know what I would do, but God forbid that corporate Democratic consultants should listen to us. But all right, guys, you tell me whether you think this makes sense. So I would pick specific instances of Donald Trump saying something where he did not deliver. Every one of them has to be about the average American, okay? So I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna bring you so many jobs, and then show the actual record. And then every time that you show one of his lies, I would have some sort of graphic of vomit coming out of his mouth, right? Or like he just vomits out this information, these lies all the time. And every time I would prove lie, and then I would emphasize, this guy's a phony. He's a total phony. He's trying to trick you. Are you gonna fall for his tricks? Are you gonna fall for the tricks of this cheap con man? Because then that asks the audience, wait, is it true or is it not true? Because if it's not true, then wait a minute, I am falling for the tricks of a cheap con man, right? So challenge them on it. And so I would prove 1,000 times over how he is not for you. He's only in it for himself. And the main thing I would pound away at as the number one example, once you got past economic issues that are policy, is what did he do with all the money he raised from the MAGA guys?
Oh yeah. Totally.
Because I'm gonna look out for you guys, right? And then they took a couple $100 million. Where is it, Donnie? Where is it? And they should keep asking, where's the money that you raised? Because I guarantee you, a ton of it went into his properties. So let's go, smarten up, and actually run a race against this guy. So thank you for showing up. I think it's super late. You better start running. You better start running. If you're not gonna get out of the race, run super aggressively.
Yeah, I agree, totally agree. Well, with that said, why don't we move on to a different angle to Biden's pro-worker campaigning. So, President Joe Biden visited striking United Auto Workers in Michigan this week and encouraged them to keep fighting. Let's take a look.
Wearing a union ball cap and armed with a bullhorn, President Biden told the striking United Auto Workers to keep fighting for higher wages.
Unions built the middle class. That's a fact. So let's keep going. You deserve what you've earned, and you've earned a hell of a lot more than you're getting paid now.
President Biden, who exchanged fist bumps with the workers, the historic visit to the picket line was personal and political, underscoring a long career backing labor.
To have the President of the United States walk a picket line in support of workers, that's huge.
The president is trying to shore up his support among working voters as he seeks re-election and to reclaim a state he won by about 3% in 2020 after Trump's 2016 victory in the battleground. The UAW has yet to endorse Mr. Biden, but Union President Shawn Fain cheered on his visit today.
Our president has chose to stand up with workers in our fight for economic and social justice.
Now, regardless of what you think about President Biden, regardless of the critiques you have in regard to his administration, the job he's done so far, and to be sure, we definitely have some critiques and criticisms. Fact of the matter is, what Biden did by visiting these striking United Auto Workers is unprecedented. It is unheard of for a United States president to do what President Biden did in visiting these workers and in encouraging these workers. And as he, did this on Tuesday of this week, keep in mind that Trump is also set to essentially address workers, specifically non-union workers in Michigan. He's decided to skip the Republican primary debates and speak to the workers instead. But make no mistake about it, with Trump, it's clearly a campaign tactic. With Biden, it is also a campaign tactic. However, if you look at his administration, you look at the National Labor Relations Board and who he has appointed onto that board and how they have been pretty aggressive fighters on behalf of workers, you see that Biden doesn't just talk about supporting workers, he's actually put some action behind it. With that said, while he was speaking to the workers, he also said this: the fact of the matter is that you guys, the UAW, you saved the auto industry back in 2008 and before, made a lot of sacrifices, gave up a lot, and companies were in trouble. Okay, and then he says, but now they're doing incredibly well, and guess what? You should be doing incredibly well too. Then Biden shook hands with picketers and put his arm around a woman who appeared to wipe tears from her eyes. You deserve what you've earned, and you've earned a hell of a lot more than you're getting paid right now, Biden said. Cenk.
Excellent job in showing up to the picket line, finally getting it. I'm thrilled that he's getting it. And Ro Khanna deserves a lot of credit because he went to the picket line earlier, and that helped push Biden into going himself. And he asked Biden to come out there, and that's a Democratic congressman doing that. So great job to him. The things that he's saying is good. The American people are on the side of UAW and the workers. We'll get to that in a second. So, but it makes the politics of it very simple too. It's not complicated politics. It's not complicated policy. It's actually a bit shocking that he's the first president who's ever joined a picket line. All the other Democratic presidents should be embarrassed. Of course, the Republican presidents stand for big business and giant profits for a very few amount of people. So they hate picket lines. They hate the average American worker. So that's not surprising. But I do remember Obama saying that if the unions were ever challenged, that he put on his boots and joined the picket line. Those boots sat with tremendous cobwebs in them in Obama's closet. So again, Biden outdoing Obama, credit to him on that. So, we think that he has a complicated record, some good, some bad, including on labor. But overall, on labor is one of his strongest parts of his record. And so this follows suit on that. He's delivered on this more than he has in other areas and more than other presidents have. So far, so good.
Right, exactly. Credit where credit is due. I mean, I'm a firm believer in acknowledging what politicians do right, what we support, but also being honest about where we see the flaws. You can hold two different thoughts about the same person at the same time. And I know that's a difficult thing to grasp in today's political environment, but I think honest actors usually do that instead of just seeing someone as all good or all bad.
Let me just say one more thing about that. Actions matter, right? So, you tell me a good game about voting rights or $15 minimum wage, and then you don't do anything, Joe Biden. I'm not going to give you credit for it. We don't do propaganda here. We're not like the rest of American media. So on the other hand, when you show up, this is action. It's not just, there's policy matters, regulation matters, but this also matters. Why? Because it puts pressure on the car companies, knowing that the president is backing the workers, to give them a better deal, because they're a little worried, rightly or wrongly, they're a little worried about what the president might do. So that helps move the numbers in the direction of the workers, which is what the president of the United States is supposed to do. He's supposed to represent the citizens and not some giant global corporation. It's nameless and faceless for a bunch of foreign shareholders and executives. One of these is a foreign company anyway, right? Chrysler got bought by a European company. So yes, you're supposed to represent the citizens. Yes, I'm super depressed that American politics overall is in such a sorry state that you have to beg and plead Democratic presidents to do the most simple, obvious thing. But he did it, guys. Credit where credit is due. So nice job on showing up, Joe Biden.
Right, and when it comes to the striking workers, there was a little bit of concern that he would try to squash it. But he has made it clear, and he seems committed to avoiding any White House involvement in this strike, meaning any White House involvement in attempting to end the strike. The ball is in the workers' court. He's supportive of them, and showing them how supportive he is, I think, is really important.
I'm sorry, one super last thing, guys. If Joe Biden turns around and does or really tries hard to get a lot of his promises done, then I'm going to switch from dropout to don't drop out, because it's not personal. I don't know Joe Biden. I don't care about Joe Biden. All I care about is policy. Is he getting the job done or isn't he? So if he starts fighting like this and shows me a lot more, then I'm super happy to have him run, because both from policy perspective, but also from a politics perspective, because it'll improve his poll numbers. He'll be a much better, healthier candidate. So give me more of this. Nice job today.
So when we come back from the break, we have some more UAW related news. Pennsylvania is a really interesting place to kind of hone in on when it comes to this strike, because it turns out this strike is bringing people from across the political aisle together. It's unifying people. I think it's an important message to focus on. So we'll do that when we come back from the break.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, Pierre, Adrian Carton, and Alexandra Papadopoulos. So you guys are awesome, I love that Greek name. So you can join those heroes by hitting the join button below the video and become part of the TYT community. And Don Bussey gifted 5 Young Turk memberships. So Don, you're awesome, we appreciate you. Casper.
We're not quite done with the United Auto Workers yet. Let's get to our next story.
The strike, which began September 14, is the first time the UAW has staged walkouts at all 3 of the big 3 manufacturers. And this guy Fain said the expansion of the strike is a response to a lack of progress with GM and Stellantis. Quote, "We will shut down parts distribution until those 2 companies come to their senses." Says one man, like he's, I don't know, like he's Mussolini. Making demands, making threats, trying to bully.
Like he's Mussolini, says conservative personality Mark Levin, who has chosen to take sides with the corporate CEOs of the car industry who collect $29 million in a single year in executive pay, while their workers had taken massive pay concessions following the 2008 economic collapse in order to save those very auto companies. Now those workers are striking, but Mark Levin can't have it. In fact, he believes that the president of the United Auto Workers, who is fighting on behalf of those workers, is basically a brutal dictator. Well, he went on to suggest that unions should be subject to the same antitrust laws as corporations. Let's hear that argument.
Why aren't our antitrust laws applied to major unions? Why are they only applied to major corporations? What's in the best interest of 330 million Americans? That some tiny percentage of the workforce can affect all the rest of the members of the workforce in a very negative way, and every single consumer? What kind of theory of economics, what kind of model is that? Don't tell me that's for the people. This president or this boss of the UAW is a thug. You either meet his demands or he's going to punish the country. No person like that should have this kind of power. No elected person should have this kind of power.
Now, it should be noted that Mark Levin seems to have an affinity for dictators, because he compared the judge who ruled that Donald Trump is guilty of financial fraud, Stalin, or someone who's engaging in Stalinism. But Cenk, you think he makes a decent point there? I mean, why don't unions get treated the same way as corporations when it comes to antitrust laws? Mergers and acquisitions. Oh wait, that doesn't make any sense at all.
So it's frustrating because conservatives get tricked by guys like this. They think he's smart because he uses phrases like, "There's no theory of economics like that." Oh, okay, that's a nice phrase. And then you throw words around like antitrust for unions. But what does that mean, Mark? I mean, look, I don't think he's an idiot. I think he's a liar. But you tell me, Mark Levin, are you an idiot? Do you not know what antitrust is? Antitrust is when one company has too much power in a market and they can affect prices that affect the consumers. And there's many other problems with a monopoly, and that's why you have to do antitrust to protect consumers and to protect the free markets. The unions represent labor. How's the labor of one company going to merge with the labor of another company in another industry and create a competitive problem? That doesn't make any sense. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations Business School, Econ 101, read all of it. Obviously, Mark Levin has either read none of it or is purposely lying to you, because that idea is so nonsensical, idiotic, that you either know nothing about economics or you think my audience isn't that bright. I'll just lie to them 24/7. I'll use words that sound smart, but I'll trick them into voting for lower wages for themselves. He doesn't talk about the thugs that took $29 million a year, the CEOs, that didn't share that wealth with their workers who made it happen. He doesn't talk about those thugs. Those are his bosses. Mark Levin works for his advertisers, who are those giant corporations. So instead, he blames the average American worker while pretending to be populist. But there's a second layer to it. He's like, can you believe this one guy? He's bullying everybody. Really, Mark, you're gonna complain about people bullying folks after you've been kissing Donald Trump's ass for the last 7 years? Are you gonna say with a straight face that Donald Trump isn't the biggest bully we've ever seen in American politics? And by the way, as a matter of political strategy, I don't disagree with his bullying. I disagree with his policy, I disagree with everything he says, but bullying does work in politics. But you can't say that Trump doesn't bully. That's absurd.
I know, Cenk, but let's be fair. Donald Trump is his bully.
Yeah,
right?
and so he likes it.
Totally okay.
Yeah. When you bully in behalf of the rich and on behalf of Mark Levin and liars and right-wing media, and when you bully the little guy who has no chance and you do it in favor of the richest people in the world and multinational corporations, then Mark Levin loves your bullying. But if you actually bully, I mean, the guy's a union boss. He's supposed to represent his workers. What do you mean bully? Yeah. What is he supposed to do? Go to the management and go, okay, I'll give you whatever you want. Just pay my workers as little as possible. If you're a union worker out there or any worker out there, you should want somebody that represents you. You're goddamn right they should bully management. Now, not unfairly, but to fight back on your behalf. That's the whole point of a union. Okay, but Mark Levin despises the average American, despises him, elitist prick that he is. So he's trying to bully you into backing those incredibly wealthy CEOs.
Let's just cut to the chase, okay? I mean, you don't really need to think about it too hard, because fact of the matter is people like Mark Levin do not believe that working Americans should have a seat at the table. They shouldn't be allowed to collectively bargain, negotiate what their pay should be, negotiate what their working conditions should look like. Now, there were no complaints when the workers were willing to take pay concessions in order to save these auto companies from going underwater, right? But now that these companies are doing real well, so well that their CEOs can get paid tens of millions of dollars every year, maybe it's time to share some of that wealth, because it's not just the executives who run the business. It's the individuals who put in the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears to manufacture and produce the very vehicles that are being purchased and that are driving the revenue and the profits in the big three, okay? So with that said, let's talk a little bit about how Mark Levin represents almost no one other than the corporate elite, because a new piece that came out in the Washington Post was really illuminating. It focused on Pennsylvania and how voters across the political aisle are absolutely united in their support for the UAW strike and the workers. So before we get to that, let me just take a step back and look at the polling. So let's start with a new poll that was put out by for Data for Progress. So they talked to likely US voters between September 20th through the 21st, and here's what they found. 62% of all voters support the UAW strikes, which expanded last week to every General Motors and Stellantis parts distribution facility in the country. Nearly half, 48%, of Republican voters support the strikes, according to Data for Progress, along with 79% of Democratic voters and 59% of independent and third-party voters. Now, keep in mind that this is one poll. It's an organization that certainly leans progressive. But if you take a step back and you look at other polls, you'll find even higher percentages of support. Let's go to graphic 4. Gallup found that 75% of Americans side with UAW members compared to just 19% who side with the auto companies. And so now let's take a look at that report that was put out by the Washington Post. It talks about Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Bucks County is just outside of Philadelphia, and it is a politically diverse area. For instance, Bucks County went for President Biden in 2020, but Republicans also turned out strong, re-electing Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick to Congress. And according to the Washington Post, so far the residents of Bucks County appear mostly sympathetic to the workers. So Russ Oaksley, who's a 68-year-old retired truck driver who last belonged to a union when he was just 18 years old, said the following: "The CEOs and all the people at the top of the pile have all the money, but the guys at the bottom get hardly anything." He brought the striking workers firewood to help them stay warm in the middle of their strike. Then at a coffee house near the striking workers, a self-described liberal woman named Sherry Christenberry, I should say, was having breakfast with two of her friends. Her friends are from church, and here's what she's told the Post: "I think there's just been this huge disparity between management and labor for years and years and years. I think most people are sympathetic to the union workers because the disparity is too large. There needs to be a little evening out in every industry." Now, her friend from church, her name is Karen Marcus, describes herself as a moderate Republican. She does not support Donald Trump, but is in fact a self-identified Republican. She recalled a recent lecture at their church about economic justice and said this: "I think most people would be sympathetic to saying a person ought to be given a wage that is in proportion to the success of the business. The people who are producing the product are the reason why the business is successful." At the next table over was a guy named Randy Hipps. Now we're talking about a conservative Trump supporter. What did he have to say about the striking workers? Does he agree with Mark Levin? No, he says they should get what they're entitled to and be able to maximize their talents and get paid what they're worth. Again, Randy Hipps, residents of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and a Trump supporter. And finally, local man Chris Kinsey described himself as a very pro-union individual and fully supportive of the strike when asked whether he is worried about car prices going up, because the dominant narrative in corporate media is like, oh, this strike is bad, prices are gonna go up, you should be against the striking workers. Chris Kinsey is not buying it. He tells the Post, "I don't think we should be worried about that kind of thing. I think we should be worried about Americans making a living wage." A real patriot, Chris Kinsey. So much gratitude for you.
Look, the elites have lost touch with mainstream Americans, and so this is not a new phenomenon. And in fact, in my book, Justice Coming, I explain exactly why. They started taking corporate money in the form of donors, and the advertisers are also giant corporations. So there's capture of the media and capture of the government officials. So they've lost track of just fundamental politics, let alone policy, right? So before 1978 and the corporate takeover of our government, it was elementary that you would campaign based on what the average American wants. How else would you get enough votes? And I mean, it's just the most simple thing in the world. But since people have lost track of that, you have to do polls explaining that, yes, average American workers are in favor of average American workers. And that actually comes as a surprise to people in Washington. They're like, oh, didn't see that. People are in favor of the strike. That's like generally surprising. When it's surprising every time. They're like, in fact, again, sorry, but in my book, Justice Coming, I show quotes from cable news anchors every time they see a progressive poll for like, Americans want paid family leave. When you have a kid, you want 12 weeks off to be able to take care of the kid. The CNBC anchor goes, in really shocking results today, people want a couple of days off after they have a baby. How could that be shocking? How? But so apparently Biden's woken up enough to realize you might want to stand up for the American workers because we're all American workers. And they know so many, guys, part of the second part of the problem is they know so many white collar workers, so many people in the professional class that a lot of them have forgotten about the rest of America. So, but this is a good thing for the Democrats and Biden to go in this direction. Yes, obviously support the average American workers. And the last part of the puzzle that's great is it gets idiots like Mark Levin and Trump and the Republicans to counterattack and makes them look like they're out of touch and against the average American worker. Easy.
Absolutely. Now, when we come back from the break, we're going to dive into Bill Maher's conversation with longtime Democratic operative James Carville. They decide to basically trash everyone in the political spectrum, kind of incoherent in their political views here. But there was also a moment that I'm sure Cenk absolutely loved as they weighed in on whether Joe Biden should run for re-election or not. So we'll get into all those videos and share all that with you when we come back.
Ice cream.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Also Fuzzy 1Z and BMK, because they just hit the join button below and became part of the TYT family. And Chaplain Fred, who's been here a while, gifted 5 Young Turks memberships because he's a wonderful and generous person.
By the way, I love me a Fuzzy 1Z.
Yeah. Hard to argue.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's get to this fascinating exchange between Bill Maher and James Carville.
When they send a redneck to Washington, they do not around.
Don't you love when they go and interview these people at a Trump rally? It's amusing. And of course, they have somebody with, hey, like Trump, grab my and you look at it, and ain't nobody in the world want to get within a mile of you. Don't worry. Nobody's going to grab that fucking. If they get through the fat wrinkle to get to it, I got to admit, it gives me, I shouldn't do it. It's not, I do, you should never do it in my business. I actually feel superior to these people.
I should feel superior to these people. That was the comment in regard to Trump supporters from longtime Democratic operative James Carville as he was having a conversation with Bill Maher on Bill Maher's podcast titled Club Random. Now, the conversation was somewhat incoherent because while they, of course, clearly relentlessly mocked Trump supporters, they then went on to mock and criticize the so-called coastal elites. Let's take a look at that.
There is a certain coastal arrogance in this country, and people feel it. All right? Yes. They just do. And you can't tell me that it doesn't exist because I know that it does.
I feel it. I feel it all the time. Yes, there is. Yeah, it's a lot what we were just saying before about people have to be able to talk to each other even if you don't completely agree. The other person is not a deplorable. I get it. Like I would never.
Some of them are.
Of course they are. Some of them are.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, okay, but
yeah, that's true. And some people on the left are deplorable. I'm sorry.
I find the left to be just annoying.
Exactly.
They're more than just not important. It's just annoying.
Exactly.
And the Western far left is habitually the most stupid, naive people you can imagine.
So that second clip, I think there are two differences in the groups that they're talking about, but they begin with the coastal elite, as they had previously engaged in some of the most elitist rhetoric I've heard in regard to Trump supporters, right? Attacking them for being dumb, mocking the way they look. And so it's just amazing to me how in the context of the same conversation, they can basically carry out the very actions that they are critical of in regard to coastal elites.
Yeah. So look, I love honest conversations and I like kidding around. So I feel bad criticizing when they're trying to be honest, but I also have to be honest and tell you what I think they said wrong there. And yeah, it looks like they didn't really make up their mind or have a principled position because on the one hand, you take regular people going to Trump's rally and you talk about how fat and unattractive they are. He said between the rolls and stuff. Okay. That's not how I would go after. And look, I'm not shy about going after Republican voters. You've seen me do it many, many times. I do it in my book. But I wouldn't go after them that way. So, we all got glass houses. And then they say, oh, Trump can grab me by the P word, right? And he said, and Carville says, I wouldn't want to. That's kind of what Trump says. Remember, whenever he gets an allegation of sexual harassment, he says, look at him, who would want to anyway?
Yeah, he does say that, you're right.
You don't want to be like Trump, that's not a good look. And saying I feel superior. No, look, if there's a person, you just showed a clip and someone's saying something racist or sexist or something along those lines, it's very specific and obvious, right? And you say, yeah, of course I feel superior to that because that's a hateful opinion and it's not open-hearted and it's certainly ignorant, etc. Okay, that's definitely understandable. But if you just say it in general, that's a terrible look, right? But then you turn around and say the problem is the coastal elites. But brother, I don't know anything that is more coastal elite than what you just said. So make up your mind, which way are you going with this? And so, but it is true that both corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans and corporate media are definitely coastal elites. That's definitely true, and they have a massive bias there. I don't mind them talking about that. I wish they'd talk about that with specific examples, but a lot of those guys are, let's be honest, friends with Carville and Bill Maher, so I don't really know who they're complaining about. So now finally, when he gets to the left, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on if he's talking about social or economic issues. So if he says, you know what, some portions of the left are annoying and naive, and you take, let's say, a position of, hey, everybody should be forced to say Latinx instead of Latino or Latina, right? Okay, I can see how that fits that description. And even if you don't agree that that's annoying or wrong, it's not a crazy opinion to think that that's annoying or wrong.
Definitely
right?
not a crazy opinion.
So that's totally understandable, and they've got to be able to criticize their own side too. So again, open, honest conversation, no problem. But if you're talking about economic issues, and often those two think the same way about economic issues, no, brothers, the progressive left is exactly where the middle of the country is. 2/3 of Americans agree with us on everything, right? And so if you think that's stupid or naive, that's just you working for corporate America. So be a little bit clearer in your attacks. I don't mind, like I've now said 3 times, it's great that you're having an honest conversation, but you should figure out who you're actually trying to attack, and more importantly, come with receipts if you're criticizing in that fashion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Look, I think the reason why the arguments made here seemed incoherent and hypocritical is because of the fact that we have to acknowledge that in both political parties, there are gradations, right? So I think even among Trump supporters, right, about 30% of them in poll after poll support some of the worst things that he wanted to do, wants to do. They support him no matter what. They don't care about any potential criminality he engaged in. They just support him, they're loyalists to him, and they love everything that he espouses. But the rest of the Republican voting base, right, I think there are gradations. And so to just lump them all together as if every single one of those voters is exactly the same and they're all bad, I think would be a giant mistake. Same with the left. Think about the giant tent that the Democratic Party represents. There are so many different groups within the Democratic Party that I don't agree with on many issues. You get what I'm saying?
Of course.
And so when they were attacking the coastal elites, they at first started with the arrogance of the coastal elites, which I believe is true, and then they kind of moved on to leftists. And when they say, oh, I find them annoying, they're specifically talking about the scoldy nature and the language policing. I mean, that was my interpretation of what they were arguing about. But the point I'm trying to make is that within each political group, there are subgroups. And I don't think it's right to judge the entirety of that voter base based on one subgroup.
Yeah, and look, just generally saying you feel superior at large,
super gross,
is terrible. And it's also not true. There's people might not know a lot about politics, but they might know a lot about some other things. They might be greatly skilled. What do you mean superior or how? What does that mean? So I would like to think that I know a lot more about politics maybe than the average bear and certainly the average Republican, but I'm being honest about that. But you put me on a camping trip and they're gonna laugh at their ass off at what an idiot I am. I go camping plenty of times, still can't barely set up a tent. So we're all good at different things, and you looking down your nose at people isn't gonna help at all.
Definitely not. Now I wanna go on to one other portion of their conversation that I thought was also very interesting. So, During Bill Maher and James Carville's conversation on Maher's podcast, the topic of Joe Biden running for re-election came up. I was really curious to hear what they both thought about Joe Biden deciding to run for re-election, even after he had previously said he didn't plan to. So let's start with Bill Maher. What did he have to say?
Right now, let's assume the election was November the 3rd of this year.
Oh, Lord.
And they said the candidates are Joe Biden, the Democrat, Donald Trump, the Republican, Joe Manchin and Larry Hogan, no labels, and Cornel West. Trump would be a betting favorite.
I talked to Paul Begala today.
He told me, I saw him.
I think we're on the same page with Biden. Did a great service, but whereas in 2020, maybe he was the only one who could have beaten Trump, I think now he's the only one who will lose to him. He cannot run for president. He'll look bad in the debates. It's too much. And he's I think going to lose. He will be Ruth Bader Biden, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the presidency. It's not a good look. And any 50-ish, not stupid, woke Democrat with a D by their name, people just vote D and R, that person can win.
Now that's an argument that's been made on this show rather aggressively by Cenk Uygur. So Cenk, was it cathartic to hear one other person finally say that pretty aggressively?
Yeah, so what I'm partly trying to do is break the hypnosis that all Washington is in. And so I've given you so many facts, but if you're new to this, polling in the 30s for an incumbent means an automatic loss. Let alone the fact that you have to win by 5. I'll add to what James Carville said. He said, if Cornel West, Larry Hogan, et cetera, are in the race, and it was going to be held in about a month, that Trump would be the betting favorite. No, that would not be close. Trump would landslide Biden if that were the fact pattern, okay? Because the Democrat has to win by 5. Joe Biden won by 4.5 last time and barely squeaked out the victory in the Electoral College. It's super unfair, but it doesn't matter that it's unfair. It's a reality, okay? We could try to fix the Electoral College. I wish the Democrats would ever try, but that's a separate issue. For now, we got to win by 5. Even if Cornel West and Larry Hogan and all those guys are not in the race, Biden's losing by 1, and he's going in the wrong direction. So while I disagree with Carville and Bill Maher often, and even earlier in that episode, they're talking about basically saying that they feel superior to Republican voters. I hated that kind of talk. And then Bill Maher quotes Paul Begala, and they were talking hitting the coastal elites. Paul Begala is the epicenter of coastal elites. So I mean, my point is, I don't often agree with Maher and Carville, but on this one, they nailed it. And that's why you need to be open to everyone and you need to have honest conversations because, hey, it turns out that Bill Maher and James Carville saying the truth there could make a difference. Because I got news for you guys. Look, we try really hard and we have a petition, tyt.com/dropout, for Biden to do the right thing and not be selfish and hand it off to someone else who can win, right? And I want you guys to do that. If we get tons of people to sign on, maybe it makes a difference. But if we're being honest, in Washington, they're going to listen to Bill Maher and James Carville 1,000 times more than they're going to listen to progressive outsiders like us, right? So for them to say the obvious that he's going to lose and that he should step aside, that any other Democrat would probably easily beat Donald Trump, well, thank you. That is 100% correct, and I'm glad that someone else finally said it.
All right, let's give you all updates on where the current debate over the government funding bill stands, beginning with this.
And we are taking a stand here. We're operating in good faith. We're negotiating together for the best outcome for the people. And we do not desire a shutdown. I yield back to the gentleman.
A previous speaker just said that no Republican member wants a shutdown. I have the quotes right here, which I will submit for the record when I'm done.
After Republican Congressman Mike Johnson claimed that the GOP was not interested, was not trying to shut the government down, Democratic Representative Brendan Boyle shot back with a claim that basically, no, you guys are very much in favor of shutting down the government. I've got the receipts. Now, he's about to share those receipts with all of us. Let's take a look.
One House Republican said, let's shut it down. Another Republican colleague saying we shouldn't fear a government shutdown. Most Americans won't even miss it. And the leader of the Republican Party, the former president, saying, quote, unless you get everything, shut it down. Make no mistake about it. We are here because certain members on the other side of the aisle want a shutdown. They even said they want a shutdown. And why should we be surprised about that? Ever since I was in high school 30 years ago, we've had 5 government shutdowns. All 5 took place under House Republican leadership. When Democrats are in charge of the House, 0 government shutdowns during that same time period.
Congressman Boyle is right about that. And what's fascinating about this situation is, to be honest, I was under the impression that Republicans in the House would, essentially lead to a government shutdown, because typically when that happens, the blame is placed on the president. But in this case, if you look at the polling, it's abundantly clear that the majority of Americans would actually blame the Republican Party for causing the government shutdown. Now, unless Congress and the White House agree on spending legislation by midnight on September 30th, the government will in fact shut down. We're gonna talk about some of the ramifications of that in just a moment. But Boyle also took the opportunity to educate the public and the Republican Party about what exactly would happen when the government shuts down. Let's watch.
Now, in terms of the one Republican member who said that the American people won't miss it if there is a government shutdown, actually, here's what would happen. More than 7 million Americans would lose access to their benefits, women, infants, and children. 2.5 million active duty and reserve personnel serving in our nation's armed forces would go without the pay they deserve. 2.3 million federal workers could be furloughed or forced to work without pay. Millions of Americans who are going to our airports and going through TSA lines suddenly finding themselves with unending delay. There are, by the way, 1.6 million Americans who fly through our airports every single day who will be impacted. 660,000 college students who rely on federal work study. I was one of those students at one point who relied on that program. So make no mistake about it, there are real consequences to shutdowns.
There are real consequences to shutdowns. I'm gonna give you more details about that in just a moment. But Cenk, what are your thoughts on Representative Boyle's, willingness to fight back as Republicans are pretending that they're not the cause and they don't want a government shutdown?
So if you're new to politics, you might think that what you just saw there is perfectly normal. A Republican says something that's not true and a Democrat comes in and counters it. It's supposed to be a debate, 2 different parties, makes sense, right? Well, if you're not new to politics, you know that that was a shocking scene. So for the last 25 years, I've been covering politics, and the Democrats have been doing unilateral surrender the entire time. They almost never counter Republican lies. And to do it on the floor of the House and to point out with their own quotes what they said wrong and point out that they're lying, wow. Isn't that so sad that it's like a shocking thing for our side to actually defend itself? God, Jesus, man, the Democratic Party has been a mess for so long. But thank you, Congressman, I appreciate it. Way to go, Brendan Boyle. Can we please get more? By the way, do you wanna know why they're doing it? Because they have now, my job is to be honest with you. So I don't want to take a nice story and then give you some depressing angle to it, but I gotta be clear, right? So the reality is a lot of these guys have figured out, you can get grassroots fundraising if you give fiery speeches or just speeches where you defend your side on the floor of the Congress or in hearings. They saw Katie Porter raise a lot of money with her whiteboard, right? They've seen AOC and others raise a lot of money. On the other side, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are printing campaign contributions. And to be fair to them, they're getting it from the grassroots, not from corporate donors, right? So as these guys are getting corporate cash, they're like, oh, well, we might get some good grassroots money too. But hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. Just fight for us for the first time in your lives. So what he said is indisputable. My whole life, Republican politicians have been universally liars. They almost always lie. And so them saying, oh, we don't want a government shutdown. It's absurd. We just saw you for the last how many weeks say over and over again, I don't care, we'll take a shutdown. We want the shutdown. And they don't, why do they not mind a government shutdown? That's why his second part of his speech was so important. Because the Republican politicians don't care about the average person at all. At all. So they're like, oh, it would hurt the average American. Who cares? Why would I care about them? I'm here to serve the rich. And the rich like it when it's a government shutdown because we're going to bargain on their behalf to cut spending on the average American.
Right, and that is the sticking point, right? You have the House Freedom Caucus, which consists of the most conservative Republicans, demanding all sorts of nonsensical cuts to various federal government programs, which of course is not going to pass in the democratically controlled Senate. Joe Biden is less likely to sign that kind of legislation into law as a Democratic president. And so it's really a losing battle. And even Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is getting real salty over the House Republicans handling of this entire situation. Now, with that said, I wanted to focus on one of the other very obvious consequences of failing to pass a government spending bill or funding bill, I should say, because FEMA is already taking action because they are anticipating a government shutdown. That means that during a government shutdown, they are not going to be able to get the funding they need in order to deal with disaster relief across the country. And this is all happening as we enter hurricane season. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency is essentially putting a hold on the resources they're offering to people who are trying to rebuild after their town or their state was impacted by a hurricane or a wildfire. The Biden administration has started to ration federal disaster aid, delaying the delivery of about $2.8 billion in grants. So the money is available in the event of a crisis, according to state and federal officials and budget documents obtained by the Washington Post. The last minute move has allowed the Federal Emergency Management Agency to shore up its rapidly dwindling budget against the immediate threat of wildfires, hurricanes, and other natural disasters as they arise, according to a senior agency official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. But it has also disrupted longer-term recovery projects in Florida, Puerto Rico, and other communities hit by past calamities. And so when you hear a little bit of panic in Senator Mitch McConnell's voice over how House Republicans are handling this issue, understand that he's not just concerned about the ordinary American, he's concerned about the political ramifications that will arise as Republicans abandon ordinary Americans in this ridiculous fight to fund the government.
So there's two ways that a government shutdown stops. Either some sort of emergency that really affects people so much that they get furious, like the last government shutdown that lasted so long got resolved when air traffic controllers stopped showing up to work because they weren't getting paid. And then everybody panicked because nobody could fly. And that's how it got resolved. In this case, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe as he alluded to, it's the TSA workers and the lines are so long at airports that people get furious. It could be that a hurricane hits and you can't get relief funding there quickly. But what is more likely is because it takes a ton of real people rage for politicians to have it register. It barely registers normally. But if the stock market crashes, they'll open that government up as quickly as possible. And so good news on that front, not if you hold stocks and generally, but yesterday the market went down more than it has in a long time. So we'll see if it continues to go down, if that panic starts a little bit. Because that normally government shutdowns don't bring down the markets that much, certainly not anywhere as much as not raising the debt ceiling. That's why the debt ceiling, there's a lot of huffing and puffing, but that never actually gets challenged, right? It's always a bluff. In this case, it's not a bluff, but it can eventually hurt the markets bad enough that these politicians then hear from their bosses, which is their donors, and then they'll open it back up. But in the meanwhile, they're negotiating to try to take things away from you and to give it back to their donors.
When we come back for the second hour of the show, we've got a lot more to get to, including Donald Trump questioning whether the anti-abortion movement is really just a business looking to fundraise money.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we've got that and more. It's going to be a spicy second hour. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.